Metro Boomin produced some of the most popular songs in the last 10 years.
Work so hard, forgot how to vacation.
Damn, my stomach feeling sickly. I want it all now.
Yo, Percocet, Miley Percocet.
His style is iconic, his sound is influential, and his music is simple all at once. He's had 3 #1 albums in a row, but even more than that, he's managed to become a widely known legend in a job that usually goes unappreciated and unnoticed by the general public. So how did Metro Boomin become the most well-known hip-hop producer alive? Let's get into it.
What do you want, more than anything?
I want to make an impact.
Everyone wants to make an impact, but not everyone knows how to get it. You have to go outside. You have to speak your mind.
I started Volksgeist as a way to talk about the idea of taking action and changing the world through hard work by telling the stories of people who are doing exactly that. Now I'm making my own creations, my own brand, my own art to continue that mission. The hand-painted morning sun rising over a sea of silver stars reminds me that I have to keep going no matter what. We're all sitting here watching videos about successful artists. We're watching videos about people who make music that changes the world. Because I want to motivate all of you to pursue your own dreams and never give up. This necklace is a symbol of that belief. There is no success without failure. There is no light without dark. All I want is to remind you that the only thing crazier than trying your hardest is to never try at all. So dream big. The darkest night and the brightest day is a 925 sterling silver necklace with a handmade enamel design in the shape of a sun rising over a night full of silver stars. And here's a reward for taking action. The first order after this video goes live gets a full refund, and the first 10 get 10% off after ordering. All orders get free shipping in the United States. And thank you for supporting my projects. The story of Metro Boomin begins in St. Louis, Missouri, a city that was once in the top 4 biggest cities in America. Over 100 years ago, St. Louis was a major cultural center of the world. It was the first American city to ever host the Olympics and the World's Fair, with massive art museums and zoos being built during that time, as well as being home to hundreds of automotive factories and even producing hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment like airplanes, bullets, and explosives during World War II. St. Louis is even home to the tallest arch in the world. It was built in the 1960s as a monument to American power and pride. So from the 1900s to the 1960s, St. Louis was one of the most popular destinations for Black people looking for better jobs coming from the South. This led to St. Louis being highly influential in the history of rock and roll and blues and jazz, with legendary major artists like Miles Davis, Chuck Berry, Scott Joplin, and Albert King either growing up in St. Louis or spending lots of time there to get more access to the city's music scene. But the St. Louis that Metro Boomin experienced as a kid in the late 90s and the 2000s couldn't be further from the powerful, internationally cultured city that I just described. Because while St. Louis was once on fire, Metro Boomin as a kid was more likely surrounded by nothing but ash and dust. St. Louis was once upon a time the 4th most populous city in America, but today the amount of people who still live there is about 1/3 the peak population. There were once almost 1 million people living in St. Louis. These days it's less than 300,000. Today St. Louis is defined by abandoned buildings, an extremely high crime rate, bad school systems, and overall low opportunity for young people growing up in and around the city. Metro Boomin himself received a decent education at a good high school, but of course anyone growing up in or around St. Louis will still be familiar with the harsh realities of living in a dark and gritty place like that. Metro Boomin's first experience making music came from playing bass guitar in the school band at his middle school, but it wasn't long before he got his mom to buy him a laptop and a copy of FL Studio so he could start making beats to rap over. He quickly realized that he enjoyed making beats more than he actually liked rapping. So by the time Metro Boomin was halfway through high school, his mom was regularly driving him on the 8-hour trip to the more musically, culturally influential city of Atlanta to collaborate with rappers who lived there. Metro Boomin's career grew so quickly that he was too young to drive by the time he was popular enough to travel to work with artists. One of the first artists that Metro worked with in Atlanta was Tay Don, who was signed to Gucci Mane, which led him to get introduced to Gucci Mane and soon after Future, who as we know has been one of Metro's closest collaborators ever since. So after graduating high school, Metro Boomin was already looking at a promising, successful music career with a bunch of production credits under his belt. Songs like Hard with Future or multiple tracks for Ludacris and French Montana in 2011 when he was just 17, 18 years old. But instead of jumping straight into the industry, Metro decided instead to pursue a college degree in business management from Morehouse, a black men's college in Atlanta. He wanted to gain more skills while still working on his music career at the same time. But the funny thing is, within just one semester, just a few months, Metro's production was already in such high demand that he had to leave school if he wanted to keep working on music at all. There was so much opportunity coming his way that college became a waste of time because he was in such incredibly high demand already. Even during Metro's first few years in the industry, he was already making iconic beats that still sound good to this day. Of course, when you listen to his really early beats, like the ones that he did for French Montana's Casino Life, this is not the sound that would eventually make him a legend. But if we skip forward to 2014, when he produced 4 tracks from Travis Scott's Days Before Rodeo at the age of 21, this is when Metro Boomin really started to become his own artist. The dark, atmospheric vibes, the heavy bass lines, the catchy melodies, this is the sound that would quickly make him the most sought-after producer in hip-hop, and it was already beginning to take shape. On Mamacita, which was a big hit from Days Before Rodeo, which was one of the most popular early 2010s trap mixtapes, Metro Boomin established that he intended to be on the forefront of the sound of the next generation. And this was only the beginning. The sound of Mamacita is ominous and imposing, with this Western cowboy-sounding guitar sample, deep bass lines, and distorted vocals from Travis Scott. It's a great example of how Metro Boomin's sound would spread throughout all of hip-hop and later music as a whole, showing off the dark, gothic melodies, the heavy bass, and the ominous tempos that made him the face of trap production. But best of all, the beat is simple and minimal. Metro figured out that giving rappers room to use their voices as instruments was the next step in music, and even 10 years ago, they were already figuring out that that would be an incredibly popular style. I really love how he gives the sample at the beginning of the song a minute to speak for itself. The song takes on this Western cowboy vintage feel immediately before the beat drops straight into dark trap. Talking about Days Before Rodeo, Metro Boomin also produced 3 other iconic beats for this mixtape. My favorite is Skyfall, which features Young Thug, and it again has this dark, bassy, minimal sound with glitchy, dreamy flourishes, creating a beautiful intro behind Travis's melodic humming.
Trapped in my conscious, my trap is still bucking, look out all these hundreds. Hit up the whole pharmacist, we serve all the money, my shit at your body.
The slow, spacey drums make the beats feel deep and dark. The next year, 2015, was even bigger for young Metro. He worked on all but one song from Future's DS2, orchestrating yet another successful cult classic album that served as a huge jumping off point for the trap genre's rise into the mainstream sound. DS2 is a project that defined the sound of trap before trap was the gigantic force of commercialism it ended up being later on.
Talking about what you need, all this shit. Fuck that shit. Man, I don't remember none of that shit. Where your ass was at, dog, with niggas 1 feet.
These days, it does sound a little old, but back in 2015, 8 years ago, when this came out, DS2 was the freshest sound of the day. The hypnotic, minimalistic beats, the darkly sparkling melodies, the distorted bass, all of these sonic characteristics came together to give Future a sound unlike anything else, and it helped him quickly rise to the top of the pyramid as the king of trap in a time when the trap sound was quickly becoming the most popular subgenre of hip-hop. Future and a lot of other trap rappers in this time were coming with a new vision for what rapping should sound like, with more repetitive lyrics and flows that served as a new era of what rapping could be. It's an era that was seen as more nihilistic, reckless, and dark than anything else that had come before. It was the opposite of conscious. It was the opposite of melodic. The early trap era set a precedent of rap stars who could not only be morally questionable, but sometimes downright evil.
Yeah, I just fuck your bitch, that's some Gucci flip-flops. I just had some bitches and I made them look like.
This is the theme of trap music, not just the acceptance of darkness, but the embracing of sin. And rappers like Future, Travis Scott, 21 Savage, these artists with villainous personas, they needed a sound that would be as unprecedented as their lyrics. And Metro Boomin quickly became the go-to producer to help usher in this new era. Not only did Metro Boomin contribute heavily to DS2, which went on to be considered one of the greatest trap albums ever made, he also worked heavily on Travis Scott's Rodeo, which came out just 2 months later. He contributed to 5 tracks, tracks: Pornography, 3500, Wasted, Nightcrawler, and OK Alright. And Rodeo is another project that further developed on the mid-2010s trap sound, defined by dark instrumentals, nighttime, nocturnal sounds, ominous themes, and nihilistic lyrics. And Metro was one of the top producers at this time who could come in and add different diverse sounds to these projects. On the track OK Alright from Rodeo that he co-produced with Sunny Digital and Mike Dean, you can hear how Metro used simplicity to his favor. He was making beats with little to no samples and minimal dark melodies. The drums were slow, the melodies were quiet, and he was making sure that the rappers could focus on using their voices themselves as the instrument.
I really know it's gonna be alright, but we going up, we might be.
And Rodeo was another major critical success, once again proving that Metro Boomin was on the forefront of boundary-pushing music in the mid-2010s. Rodeo has ended up being a major cult classic. Almost 10 years later, people still talk about it fondly, and it's aging really well. And I think a huge part of that long-lasting success is the way Metro Boomin contributed a gritty, southern, gothic aesthetic to the project. At this point, Metro Boomin was only 22 years old, and he was already a driving force in the next major sound of hip-hop. In fact, he was so ambitious and confident in his abilities to influence music that his next move was to brand himself as not just a producer for other artists, but to build a brand in his own lane, to become a creator of albums and turn himself into one of the most notorious producers around anywhere. But when you look at his persona and growth, it becomes clear that none of this came overnight. 99% of the time in the world of celebrity and influence and social media and music, you get more recognition and reputation by drawing attention to yourself. We don't really live in a world where the most skilled person gets the most appreciation and recognition. I think in our world, branding and behavior is more than half the battle. But music producers are one of the rare exceptions. You don't get a career in music production if you're not talented and working hard. You can't get anywhere making beats if you're not making good beats. A lot of influencers, singers, rappers, actors, I look at it sometimes like being a court jester, performing for the crowd, doing your best to entertain by whatever means are necessary, even if it sometimes means going in the wrong direction, creating controversy, drawing attention to yourself by being an objectively bad person because that's what gets the headlines written. I look at producers like these wizards in some faraway cave, away from everybody else, just producing ideas straight from their imagination, and a good producer always succeeds because there's no fakeness, no performance, just the best ideas you can possibly come up with. Being an artist is entertainment, and entertainment requires a back and forth. Being a producer is like being a designer, an engineer. It's much more pure in many ways, and Metro Boomin fits that description perfectly. In a 2013 interview with The Fader, he talked about how he knew he had to move to Atlanta since the 11th grade just to chase opportunities. He said, "I was an inside kid. I sat inside making beats every day." And he even talked about how he approached his crazy level of success at just 19. By the age 19, he had multiple hits in the Atlanta scene, songs that were getting play in clubs and bars and restaurants and stores. And the interviewer asked, "Do you party to your own songs in Atlanta clubs?" And he said, "I don't even drink. I've drank, but I'm not a drinker." Then he said, "Combine that with the fact I don't do any drugs at all." He said, "It helps keep me focused. I don't mind being around weed, but I don't ever smoke it." He also shouted out a few other producers who were making waves in Atlanta at this time. His friends Sunny Digital, TM88, Southside, a lot of these artists were co-producing his early hits on albums like Rodeo and DS2. So a lot of the credit in many ways goes to them as well. After working on Rodeo, DS2, The Slaughter Tape, Days Before Rodeo, Lil Uzi vs. The World, Metro was already highly successful and well known by trap fans, but only as much as a producer could usually be. Like I said, producers are usually just known for being in the shadows. They aren't here to entertain or get under the spotlight. They don't usually take a lot of credit. But when you have the vision that Metro Boomin did, with all of that dedication to his craft, the next step is to not just make good beats, not just make great beats, but to change popular music as a whole. Metro Boomin was about to do something that very few other producers have ever done, because trap until this point had been a regional sound. It had been around for a while, but it wasn't mainstream. And I can't say Metro Boomin invented trap, because that's not true either. The trap sound had been around for years, 10 years, more than 10 years at this point. So that would be wrong. But if there's any one person who's responsible for making trap mainstream in between 2016 and 2019, for making Future and Young Thug household names names, it would by far 100% be Metro Boomin. But how did a 22-year-old who made a few tracks for Future and Travis Scott end up being such a prolific, influential, well-known producer? By making his own albums. The first Metro Boomin album that really put him on the map as not just a good producer, but a highly influential tastemaker was Savage Mode, a full-length collab EP with 21 Savage that came out in the summer of 2016. And it not only started the legendary artistic relationship between 21 and Metro that would later go on to produce some of their best work as a team, it also influenced the entire music industry. The success of Savage Mode comes down to just how unexpected it was, thanks to both Metro and 21. And Savage Mode came right out of the gate, pushing boundaries of what trap could be, how atmospheric and moody and artistic it could be. There was a lot of tension back then around what trap was really all about. A lot of more traditional fans rejected it for being too simple, not musical enough, and too generic. And Savage Mode is kind of a response to all of that.
Young Savage, why you trapping so hard? Why these niggas capping so hard? Why you got a 12-car garage? Why you pulling out these rappers' cards?
It's ominous, it's cold, dark, and evil. That's how people describe Savage Mode. And looking back 7 years later, it's not a perfect album, but to me, it's still pretty interesting. The level of atmosphere that Metro put on this album was unprecedented, and it instantly became a topic of discussion. From the soft, ghostly piano melodies to the slow, repetitive drums, Savage Mode is an album about depression, exhaustion, sadness, the void in 21 Savage's heart, but it's also pretty funny. It's easy to miss if you aren't listening closely, but it doesn't take itself too seriously. So Savage Mode ended up being a big step forward for trap being considered a mainstream genre. It was an unexpected success. I think it got to the top 25 on the Billboard 200, but back then, trap wasn't considered really artistic. The way that Savage Mode goes against that expectation and has a minimal, quiet, understated sound made it a much more interesting topic of discussion than a lot of trap projects that came before it. A lot of that is thanks to Metro's approach to the beats. On Real Neighbor, he uses these quiet, dissonant bells to create a horror-inspired melody. On X, he uses these light, creeping synths, and the project overall works so well because 21 Savage is whispering scary, threatening lyrics while Metro's beats feel subdued. It's not what you would expect, and that's why it did so well.
One and only. How it feel to be a real nigga, man. 21. Them same nigga doubted me. Now they tryna hang around a nigga. I ain't got nothing but bullets.
Anyone can make a beat feel scary and aggressive with loud, abrasive sounds. Savage Mode lacks that energy, but it has atmosphere, and that's exactly what was needed for Metro to build up his influence and make an impact with his first full-length project. Savage Mode made a huge wave in the trap scene, and looking back, a lot of 21's lyrics aren't that memorable, but what they both got right was a great synergy between Metro's skeletal, down-tempo beats and 21's nonchalant flow. Today, it doesn't sound that crazy good, at least to me anymore. But you gotta remember, in 2016, this was new, this was fresh. This was Metro Boomin's statement that he could shake up the game. And while the album was controversial at first, with a lot of people calling it lazy, slow, dull, Savage Mode was an experiment that paid off amazingly well. And it wouldn't be long until this slow, atmospheric sound became not just the sound of hip hop, but it influenced a lot of pop in general. One of Metro's next big impacts in the music industry was his production on some of the most popular songs of the late 2010s. In a run that would end up with him having over 30 platinum records, he produced everything from Congratulations by Post Malone, which later got certified diamond, all the way to Bad and Boujee, the 4x platinum Migos single, the 4x platinum Tunnel Vision by Kodak Black, 9x platinum Mask Off by Future, 6x platinum Bank Account by 21 Savage. Metro went from producing songs for cult classic trap albums to being the driving force behind the biggest songs of 2016, 2017, and 2018. His formula of dark, simple melodies with slow, booming drums, it was becoming the sound of hip-hop, and he was going to take that as far as he possibly could.
My mama call, see you on TV.
Metro on that beat. But pull that, they don't like to see you winning. They wanna see you winning.
Yo, Percocet, Miley Percocet.
During During this time, trap became the sound of music, and a lot of that was thanks to Metro's production on some of the most popular songs of this era. But in 2017, even apart from producing so many massive billions of streams, inescapable singles, he also majorly expanded his own discography. Metro Boomin could not be stopped. He was rising to the top quicker than any hip-hop producer before him. He produced the majority of 21 Savage's Issa album, but even more than that, he dropped 3 of his own projects back to back to back. Perfect Timing with Nav, Double or Nothing with Big Sean, and the legendary Without Warning with 21 Savage and Offset. It's pretty funny that despite all of these 3 albums coming out around the same time, and all of them having Metro Boomin's name and sound on the project front and center, one of them is terrible, one of them is kind of bad, and one of them is a modern classic. I'll start with Perfect Timing, which is pretty funny because I honestly forgot that this project even existed until I went to make this video. There are some good beats on here, I can't lie about that, but it's almost funny that at the exact same time he was redefining the sound of hip-hop with boundary-pushing sounds and massive singles, Metro was also somehow involved in making a project that's a shining example of everything that's wrong and bad about the trap sound at the exact same time. Obviously, 90% of why Perfect Timing sucks is just Nav. The lyrics on this album are so average. Nav comes off like a high school student on his first mixtape. Auto-tune, the lazy flows, it's so noticeably monotonous. The only even remotely interesting things on here are from Metro's beats, but it's not like you can even listen to them for very long without Nav interrupting him.
15 racks, 20 racks, 30 racks, I got them bands. I show the eyes on my shirt and them D&G pants.
I do think there are some nice dreamy synth melodies that can feel a little aquatic or video gamey in a good way on songs like I Am and Call Me. It's all very nocturnal and atmospheric, but Nav just sucks, man. The beat from Call Me is so nice. I like it a lot, but why does Nav have to just monotonously drone on for so long about nothing?
Metro Boomin wants some more, nigga.
They tell me don't forget where you came from. I regret what I came from. In my old hood, moving like I got a vest on me. I'ma keep on.
And honestly, Double or Nothing with Big Sean that came out soon after is not a lot better. Double or Nothing has so many swing and a miss type of songs. It basically feels like Metro carries most of the album, but he just couldn't do enough to make it even remotely interesting. There are some good tracks. I kind of like I Go Legend, Who's Stopping Me, Savage Time, but overall it doesn't feel like Big Sean really brought all that much energy or detail. His writing isn't really serious or substantial. It makes the project feel very generic.
Metro Boomin wants some more, nigga.
Bitch, big dog autobiography.
So for the most part, Double or Nothing is lukewarm at best. Most of the cool parts are, again, Metro's production. My personal favorite beats came from Go Legend, In Tune, and Even the Odds.
Sure, this a toss-up. Bitch, this ain't Toyota, this European. Bitch, she ain't no hoe, she my girlfriend. Bitch, this ain't no nap, this is how I sleep. Bitch, this ain't no hobby.
But Without Warning is the exception to Metro Boomin's early 2017-2016 projects being generic. And it is the exception because the artists he was working with actually came through with good performances and lyrics. You know, Nav turned Perfect Timing into a sleepy mess of cringe lyrics and bad autotune. But Without Warning is probably one of my favorite trap albums I've heard. It dropped on Halloween 2017, and it's been a lot of people's favorite trap album ever since. 21 Savage and Offset brought the perfect energy to match Metro Boomin's instrumentals, and Metro created an atmosphere that was totally fascinating at the time and still sounds fresh to this very day, 6 years later. Without Warning is hard, dark, and dirty. The beats sample dogs barking, wolves howling, evil laughter, and horror movie screams with dissonant minor key melodies, slow-moving, booming drums, haunting keyboards, and gloomy church organs. Metro created a sound that feels simple yet clearly isn't easy. Making gothic, threatening, scary-sounding hip-hop beats without turning it into a cheap joke, that's what Metro is good at. He can put all these dark and scary feelings and sounds into a beat without turning it into Halloween music. He knows exactly how to ride the line between just enough and too much, and it makes his beats stand out great. A lot of trap beats, a lot of popular music in general, sounds very much the same. Metro does take the bones of those popular sounds, from the drum patterns to the 808s and so on, but a Metro beat is a Metro beat, and Without Warning is full of iconic sounds and styles that make it some of Metro's best work.
Oh, yard double got a lot of racks, man. Louis Vuitton got a lot of racks, man. My KK with the scope, nigga, and it's real dirty. 21, it don't got Glock on the bottom, it ain't no real dirty. Fat,
On the other hand, he also found a few rappers who could actually match his energy. I think 21 and Offset bring great engaging flows and lyrics to the project, and it's miles ahead of the other mixtapes Metro was doing at the time because the rappers actually seem to try and contribute some creativity. Without Warning, I think, was highly successful. A lot of people consider it to be one of the best trap albums ever made. It streamed very well, with Ric Flair Drip having billions of streams online, and I think it peaked at number 3 on the Billboard 200, which is pretty good for the amount of clout Metro had at the time.
Metro Boomin, want some more, nigga.
Going to the jeweler, bust the AP.
Ultimately, I like Without Warning so much because it's an album you can really get lost in. The atmosphere is so strong, it's almost tangible. Like if you lay back and listen to the album with headphones on, it feels like you can reach out and grab the cobwebs that are hanging from the ceiling of Metro Boomin's Batman production studio cave. From the howling wolves to the giant echoey sound of the eerie organs, this project I think is the first time where Metro could be considered one of the greats, one of the most creative producers around. And the craziest thing is, after how good this project is, it's not even a halfway point through Metro's career. His biggest, most successful, most influential work was still yet to come. So clearly Metro was going in a good direction at this point, despite 2 mixtapes where he absolutely carried the very mid artists who he was working with. At this point, it only made sense for him to take the next step and just make his own album, not sharing the title with someone else, but his own project. Because what else could he really do at this point? He already made 3 projects where on 2 of them, he was way more interesting and creative than the rappers he was working with. 2 projects where no one even remembers the lyrics, and they only got decent reviews because of his production. It only makes sense for him to just go out on his own and run his own show, bring his own vision to life. Why rely on other artists to hold up their end of the bargain when you could just get the best of the best to come be on your project? So Not All Heroes Wear Capes is Metro Boomin's first album of his very own, without sharing the name or the title with any other rapper, and it was by far his most impactful and successful project yet. It debuted at number 1 on the Billboard charts, which is pretty insane for a producer-led album. It sold 100,000 copies in a week, and it basically featured every rapper you can think of in just 13 songs. The format was simple. Metro created the most bombastic, high-profile, big-budget trap instrumentals he could possibly make, and he brought every artist he could find to fill the songs with entertaining lyrics. In my opinion, though, Not All Heroes Wear Capes isn't that great. I admit it was a very successful project, and it's cool and important that Metro made such a huge impact with his own album as a producer. It's one of the first ever producer albums to hit number 1 on the Billboard charts, but looking back, I don't love it. In my mind, it's not one of Metro's top 3 best projects. There are still some great moments, some cool features with good flows and melodies and interesting samples, but it isn't as mind-blowingly cool or exciting as some of Metro's other albums. Of course, though, some of these tracks did make a big impact. Space Cadet with Gunna, No Complaints with Offset and Drake, Overdue with Travis Scott, Dreamcatcher with Sway Lee and Travis, No More with Travis, Kodak and 21.
Spend all I've got. I can get it back real quick. Give you an experience.
She fucking for some.
At 17, I wanted everything that was in store. At 23, I bought it all just to make sure. Yeah, yeah. Fuck a delay.
Overtime and overdue.
It's full of beats that stand out as being creative and interesting, but it's not really as cinematic or intense as Heroes and Villains would be 4 years later. I think at this time, the kind of very chill sound feels a little bit boring at times. So for me personally, Not All Heroes Wear Capes wasn't my favorite project, but it's still really cool how Metro can bring together so many different people and make it feel like a full, complete album and not just a cheap mixtape. It's so much more than that. It takes all of the different sounds of 2018 trap and brings them together into one sound, which unfortunately does mean that some of it is boring because, let's be real, not everything at this time has aged well or even sounded great back then. That being said, Not All Heroes Wear Capes was a huge commercial success for Metro Boomin. There were some very memorable moments, and it's definitely a solid album. If Metro Boomin wasn't the biggest producer in hip-hop before, he definitely was now, and having your album debut at number 1 as a record producer is probably the biggest flex he could possibly imagine. Not that it would be his last time doing so. Metro's next big accomplishment came as part of one of my personal favorite albums ever, and I think it's one of the most creatively interesting things he's ever done, because in 2019 he worked on 4 songs from the Weeknd's After Hours, including the #1 hit Heartless, and unsurprisingly some of the album's much moodier, atmospheric, ambient deep cuts like Faith, Escape from LA, and Until I Bleed Out. easily hear his footprint on these tracks. Because of that, I think it's fair to say that Metro helped create some of After Hours' most beautiful moments, at least according to what I enjoy most about that album. And his contributions to After Hours really show that Metro isn't just limited to creating trap songs. He can create some beautiful pop music that sounds dreamy and full and melodic. It just really shows as a testament to his diversity as an artist. And then in the same year as After Hours took the world by storm, with Metro as a major contributor to its dark and stormy sound, with his production from the song Heartless helping the track reach #1 on the Billboard 100, Metro and 21 Savage also dropped a sequel to Savage Mode that ended up being arguably the best Metro Boomin project yet. When Savage Mode 2 came out, at least for me, I couldn't decide what I liked more, this or Without Warning, because I immediately loved it. Savage Mode 2 is a bit of a new sound compared to Metro's previous album. It draws from some very vintage, retro ideas. 1990s Memphis rap is one of the big influences on here, in addition to the Atlanta style. And because of that, Savage Mode 2 ends up being Metro Boomin's second #1 album in a row. And it's by far the most expensive, fancy, aggressive album he had made yet. It doesn't have the same cold, psychopathic sound of the original Savage Mode. Instead, Savage Mode 2 goes for a huge, cinematic, movie-like experience that's of course highlighted by the wild guest appearances from Morgan Freeman hosting the album like it's a DJ drama mixtape. His lines work so well in a way that feels inspiring and exciting and so unexpected. Listen to this. His monologues are just unmatched. This stuff is wild. The production on Savage Mode being, like I said, heavily inspired by late 90s Memphis and Houston rap sounds, while also mixing in orchestral trap music from the drums and cowbells on Rich Neighbor to the soulful R&B keys on Said and Done. It feels like an old movie, but in a way that keeps it fresh at the same time.
You'll be better, I feel like.
Metro Boomin want some more.
When it's all said and done, who you gon' ride for? Who you gon' slide for? Who you down to die for? I gave her my heart. She was
Tracks like Runnin' are intimidating with dissonant piano hits, the record static, and the eerie high-pitched vocal sample. Many Men is a great take on a classic 50 Cent song, and Metro completely made it his own vibe with his reinterpretation of the beat. R.I.P. Love and Said and Done are two emotional tracks with introspective lyrics and hazy, melancholic production. The bluegrass, folksy fiddle on Rich Neighbor shit hits like nothing else. It's all gorgeous. The orchestral violins on Many Men, the grand-sounding sample on Glock in My Lap. The simple truth about Savage Mode 2 is that its sound is very memorable and entertaining. It feels familiar, fresh, and honestly timeless. The combination of symphonic samples with 2010s trap with late 90s hip-hop, it works great. And I think Savage Mode 2 is one of the essential Metro Boomin albums. Metro Boomin was becoming that guy who will pull out every trick in his book to make a big-sounding, entertaining project, which was making him a legend at the same time. I think that does mean that the dark and creepy minimalism is kind of lost from Savage Mode 1, which means that this album does feel like its own thing and not really a sequel, at least creatively. But how much you think that may or may not be a bad thing is up to your own taste. I think it's fine. I do like the creepy minimal sounds on Savage Mode 1, but ultimately Savage Mode 2 is catchier, it's more entertaining, and in a lot of ways it's more fun to listen to. I also can't possibly overstate how good Metro sounds when he's working with 21 Savage. In my mind, I think Savage Mode 2 is easily one of 21 Savage's best albums. It could honestly be his best, and you can really tell the difference in how bright Metro can shine when he's working with another artist who's gonna put in the same amount of effort as him. Metro, I think, has a lot more projects out there than a lot of people remember or even listen to, because he's done so much work with artists who aren't putting in the effort. Savage Mode 2 wouldn't be nearly as entertaining if he and 21 didn't have synergy and chemistry, but they do. So if someone were to say this album is their favorite 21 Savage album, or their favorite Metro album, or even both, it makes sense to me. It's one of my favorite collaborative projects ever made. It's just that smooth.
Boomin want some more, nigga.
Rest in peace to love I gave up a long time ago. Hard times, everybody left. I'm the one you counted on.
At this point in Metro's career, he's reached an incredible point with his work and his influence. The amount of big name albums he's worked on is endless. The Life of Pablo, Stoney, I Am Greater Than I Was, DS Forever, Her Loss, Certified Lover Boy, a fucking Coldplay album, After Hours, Lil Durk's The Voice, Juice WRLD's Fighting Demons, The Carter 5. Metro Boomin's influence and sound is front and center over the entire music industry. His producer tags transcended the status of producer tag to become an almost ever-present feature on on our favorite songs. Not a producer tag, but a guarantee that whatever song you're going to hear is gonna bang. But at the same time, his biggest impact was still yet to come. That being said, Metro's success couldn't continue without tragedy. Metro's mother, the same woman who would drive him 8 hours from St. Louis to Atlanta when he was in high school, helping him make musical connections from the 9th grade onward, the same woman who encouraged him to take music seriously and pursue his dreams, was killed by her boyfriend in a tragic murder-suicide. To lose your mom after she did all of that to help you succeed is clearly devastating, but Metro didn't stop pushing himself in the world of music. I think it's pretty wild actually that he announced Heroes and Villains a few months after his mother's death. His ambition clearly stops at nothing despite how badly he was hurting. Heroes and Villains was Metro's 3rd #1 album in a row, and it's a creative follow-up to Not All Heroes Wear Capes, continuing the superhero themes from a lot of his previous work with an extremely exciting short film directed by Gibbs and Hazard where Gunna and Young Thug play news reporters and Morgan Freeman again gets another crazy role, while Metro says not a single word but still plays the hero coming back to save music in its darkest hour. And I personally love everything about Heroes and Villains. I think I've only started to like it more as time has gone on, and it's quickly becoming one of my favorite trap albums. It's less of a creepy, eerie, dark album than a lot of Metro's past work. Instead, it goes for a big cinematic superhero sound with a kind of dark vibe, but there are so many bangers on Heroes and Villains. Superhero with Future just doesn't get old. Too Many Nights with Don Toliver and Future has an alien beauty to it. Raindrops is one of Travis Scott's only good features in the last few years. The instrumental to Umbrella is so energetic. Young Thug rapping over folksy, bluesy violins on Trance is incredible. Even more so than that, Metro Spider has one of Young Thug's best verses ever. Even though he's rapping off beat, he just sounds like a machine. And the way the beat transitions into the I Can't Save You interlude deserves an award for being one of the best song transitions ever.
Everything alright. I done got used to taking pills and being up all night.
Metro Boomin, want some more, nigga.
I'm tweaking, I'm geeking, I'm tweaking, I'm geeking, I can't save no.
Creepin' is a controversial yet extremely successful song with The Weeknd and 21 Savage, and Niagara Falls is another unexpected comeback for Travis Scott in terms of quality. And of course, Feel the Fire is also another great track as well. But Heroes and Villains isn't a perfect album at all. Just a few of my opinions, but firstly, I think it's kind of strange how Metro only had a handful of collaborators on this project. Like, pretty much the only people on this project are Travis Scott, 21 Savage, Don Toliver, Young Thug, and Future. There are a few one-off appearances, but it would be really cool to hear Metro produce for newer artists or at least some unusual picks. I know it's not going to happen anytime soon, but I would love to hear someone like Babyface Ray or even a UK rapper on a Metro beat instead of the standard mainstream Atlanta melodic trap artists. I think Chris Brown should have been left off Superhero. I really don't like his voice. I think some of the Travis Scott features are pretty boring, like Lock on Me, and his verse on Trance kind of sucks too. And even though Creepin' is possibly the most successful song from Heroes and Villains, it ended up #3 on the Billboard charts. I think it's Metro's highest charting song ever, but it's actually, in my opinion, one of the Weeknd's weaker performances, and I find it pretty boring. But overall, Heroes and Villains is a really good album, and I think it came out at the right time too. Because one of the great things about Metro Boomin is that his albums always feel like a snapshot of an era. One of the weird things is that a lot of these artists on Heroes and Villains might be kind of creatively past their peak. Don Toliver just released a new album, Lovesick, and it was such a stinky pile of shit that I bet half of you don't even know it exists or haven't listened to it at all. Travis Scott has been gone from the industry for 5 years. The little music he does put out is a shadow of his former creativity. 21 Savage also hasn't put out a solo album in 5 years either. Young Thug is facing the rest of his life in jail and unable to make any new music at all. A$AP Rocky doesn't drop new music anymore. Sadly, Takeoff died, and Gunna is completely blackballed from music in general. Weirdly enough, Future is one of the only repeat appearances on this record that's still putting out good albums regularly, with I Never Liked You being one of my favorite trap albums of the last few years. When you take all that into consideration, it almost makes sense why Metro painted himself as the savior of music in the album's short film. What I'm trying to say is that Heroes and Villains somehow ended up being a much more interesting project overall than most of these artists have put out on their own in years. Because the truth is, the mainstream era of trap music that's been going on since 2016 pretty much dying. Whether it's due to the artists running out of new ideas or the oversaturation of the sound, I feel like Heroes and Villains isn't just one of the best mainstream trap albums this year, but it might also be one of the last great mainstream trap albums. Because we're in a a time when a lot of mainstream trap feels pretty stale, it's impressive that Metro still knows how to capture that sound and make it feel exciting. I can't emphasize enough how much I like Heroes and Villains. Even though it's not perfect, it's exciting in the way that a good collab album should be. The production is never not great. Metro created these deep instrumentals with so many different sounds layered on top of each other while still sounding crisp and well engineered. The stacked layers of synths, the melancholic instruments, the lonely violins, the mournful orchestral strings, it just feels satisfying to the ear in a beautiful way. Heroes and Villains really is Metro's masterpiece in a lot of ways, and it shows he's just going to keep getting better as time goes on.
In time, I've been picked up in night, I've been working in time, I've been moving inside, I've been just like, it's this life, it's this life, it's this life.
Metro Boomin doesn't get a lot of attention compared to his rapper counterparts. I'd bet most people who listen to his beats have never even heard his voice, and a lot of people wouldn't recognize him on the street either. But at the same time, when you get down to it, Metro Boomin is basically more influential, more prolific, and his work has reached far and wide, further than most of the rappers he's ever worked with. Everyone has heard Metro Boomin. From once-in-a-generation hit songs like Congratulations, Heartless, Mask Off, Bank Account, to cult classics like DS2 and Rodeo, all the way to art pop songs by James Blake, and now even movie soundtracks for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, Metro has become one of the most influential artists alive. Even though you rarely see him outside of his silent appearances in music videos, dancing quietly next to the biggest rappers alive, Metro Boomin is far more influential than he looks at first glance. Making all this music, creating this dark, cinematic style of production, and evolving it over the years, the music industry as it is now only sounds the way it does because of him. Metro's vision is the starting point for not just a ton of legendary songs and albums, but also a lot of music that he didn't make. His influence has reached far beyond Atlanta trap, even into mainstream pop from the last 5 years. While Metro is mostly only ever seen standing behind an A-list rapper dancing in a video here and there, his ideas and vision have been heard and appreciated by far more people than even know who he is. That's the beauty of being a producer. It just so happens that Metro Boomin is such a good producer that he actually got to the point where he can be an A-list artist at the same time. I think Metro Boomin is one of the most important artists in music in the last 10 years. He may not get as much attention or clout as the average rapper, but he's the real reason why we have all this music that we do. From a high school kid driving long hours to Atlanta to meet with artists and work on beats, to Rodeo and DS2, to Savage Mode, to Without Warning and After Hours, and now Heroes and Villains being probably the biggest rap album of 2023, Metro Boomin has risen to heights that no one thought was possible for a producer. 3 #1 albums in his name, multiple top 10 singles of his own, the production behind some of the most popular, biggest hits of the last 10 years. He may not have invented trap music, but he redefined what it is. Metro Boomin's impact on the music industry and his distinctive production style have revolutionized the landscape of contemporary hip-hop and trap and pop music. The relentless work ethic, dropping multiple projects year after year, working on so many songs, his synergy and collaborations with so many names from Future to Travis Scott to 21 Savage, Metro Boomin has emerged as a driving force behind all of music. His signature sound, the haunting melodies, the heavy bass lines, the meticulously layered instrumentals with texture and character, it's become synonymous with modern trap, influencing a new generation of producers and artists. Whether it's deep, atmospheric pop songs for The Weeknd, bone-shaking trap for Future, or dark, creeping, cold beats for 21 Savage, Metro Boomin has consistently demonstrated an ability to create compelling sonic landscapes that resonate with people everywhere. His impact and style extend far beyond his individual achievements, as big and important as those have been on their own. Metro's contributions to the music industry have not only shaped the current hip-hop landscape, but also set a benchmark for innovation, hard work, and creativity. Even now, more than 10 years into his journey, Metro Boomin continues to be a trailblazer and a driving force, leaving a mark on the world of music for many years to come. I'm Philip, you're watching Volksgeist, and this has been the story of Metro Boomin. This night in the brightest day is a 925 sterling silver necklace with a handmade enamel design in the shape of a sun rising over a night full of silver stars. And here's a reward for taking action. The first order after this video goes live gets a full refund, and the first 10 get 10% off after ordering. All orders get free shipping in the United States, and thank you for supporting my projects.